Hello and welcome to the tutorial on sampling for Montana State University's MUST-341 course. So this video is making a couple of assumptions. The biggest is that you know how to record into Ableton already. If you do not, then please make sure that you are okay with that. It also makes the assumption that you really don't want to see me go through and record every single sample chromatically at different dynamic levels. So I've already done that in advance. I'm just going to show you how to chop up the samples and how to get them into a sampler. So, as you can see, I have an audio track that's already been recorded too. This is a recording of my 2010 custom Phoenix electric mandolin. And this is already recorded for 3 different dynamic levels. So if I hit play, you can hear I'm just going up chromatically from the low G up to the highest note on the instrument, which is a D. And this is all that I've done for 3 different dynamic levels. So let's talk about how we would process this and get this into a sampler. First and foremost, I'm going to select the audio clip, and then I'm going to bring up the editor. You can hit Shift-Tab if it's not showing already. I'm then going to zoom in on the editor because I want to be able to see the transient marks that are detected in Ableton. So right now it's showing these little marks, these little gray arrows above the waveform. That's where it's detected a transient. If I click on that and hit Command-Shift-E, then it's going to actually separate the file right at that transient. And in fact, that's what I'm going to do. And you can see that as I'm doing that, it's changing the file and it's splitting them up into multiple different files. And in doing so, I'm going through and I'm separating every single one of these notes out, which is going to be really, really useful when we are working in the sampler device itself. So that is the second thing to do after you've recorded. Now, I will say that you should be a little wary of trusting these implicitly. Sometimes there will be a transient marker that's halfway through the sample and it's detecting, say, a residual change in the pitch. So don't necessarily take every single transient and split there. Just split at the onset of a detected note and you'll be fine. Okay, and that appears to be all of my notes. So now if I zoom out, you can see that I've already gone through and I've done all of the other notes as well. So we now have a complete set of samples that are ready to be processed. Before I do anything else, I'm going to zoom in at the very, very beginning and our very first audio sample. I'm just going to scroll all the way over in the timeline, and I have a little bit of dead air that I'm going to delete. Now, what we need to do is figure out what our notes are. If you're sampling your own instrument, you should be pretty good with that, but if not, you can insert a tuner onto your track. Okay, so that's my G. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename all these audio files so that they're not just audio, which is not particularly helpful for our purposes. So I'm going to hit Command-R, and then I'm going to give it a name that I can use as a naming convention. So I'm going to do Mando for mandolin underscore PP for pianissimo dynamics underscore, And then I'm going to give it the actual note name. So before I do anything else, I'm going to select that with Command A to select all and hit copy with Command C. Now I'm going to name this G2. I'm going to zoom out a little bit so we can see all of these files that I've got to process. And then I'm going to go to the next one, and I'm going to hit Command R, Command V, and this is going to be a flat 2. Note that I am using flats instead of sharps, and that's really important because using the sharp sign, the pound key, the hashtag, whatever you want to call it, can screw up computers because some operating systems will see that as a variable. So don't do that. Go with flats. I'm going to hit the next one by hitting Tab since it's still in rename mode. Command V, this will be A2, B flat 2, B2, and then we get to C, and this is middle C, so that's going to be C3. And if I don't know where I'm at, I can test this. Oh, I also noticed I did not spell Mando correctly. Somehow my keyboard got rid of the A, so we'll copy that and fix it. Okay, but as I said, if I don't know if the note is correct, I can always make sure that the tuner is visible and I can play the file directly. And yeah, that's a C. That is a middle C, and the next one should be C sharp. Cool. So I'm just going to continue renaming these, although instead of C sharp, again, I'm going to use D flat. Then D flat. And I'm just going to continue doing this all the way up until I have literally every single note. So I'm going to fast forward the video so you don't have to watch me name all of these files. Okay, and there you have it. I now have all of my audio files fully named. Again, isn't fast forward a great thing so you didn't have to watch me do all of that? All right, so now that they are all named, one thing I want to check is the intonation. So I have my tuner out here, and I'm going to play through and see how relatively close they are to good old-fashioned 12-tone equal tempered. Okay, so most of those are fairly in tune, but especially in the higher parts of the E course, I'm getting a little on the sharp side. So for example, this last note, D6, plus 18.5 cents. So if I wanted to retune these, I can do that. If I hit Shift Tab, I can go down here to the tuning of the sample, and I could adjust that by taking it down by negative 18 cents. And then if we play that back with the tuner visible, it's considerably better. However, that is a slight pain to do on every single file. So there's got to be a better way. And in fact, there is a somewhat easier way. If I open up the browser, I can go to my audio effects, and then under my audio effects, I have a really, really useful tool called Auto Shift that I'm going to grab and insert after my tuner. Then I am going to insert a second tuner to see how Auto Shift is working. So Auto Shift is Ableton's equivalent of Auto Tune. It's a pitch adjuster. And at this point, what it's going to do is it's going to take the input file and it's going to adjust it to the closest note on the scale. So I'm going to tell it to go to the scale chromatic, and then I'm going to set my smooth time to 1 millisecond and my strength to 100%. And this should automatically adjust everything to the different actual notes of the 12-tone equal tempered scale focused around the root key of C. Now, for my instrument, I'm just going to leave it on the mid for the input. Your mileage may vary. If you're doing a bass instrument, you're going to want to put it in bass, and if you're doing something very high-pitched, you're going to want to do it on the high section. But let's just listen to this and see what it sounds like, and if that's made a difference as we view our tuner before Auto Shift and our tuner after Auto Shift. So we can already see it's making a pretty good difference, but let's go into the high octave and really test the last couple of notes that were recorded in the recording process. All right, so we hear some artifacting. So let's try that on the high setting. Okay, that's a little bit better. I could still do a better job if I went through and re-recorded everything, but let's compare that to the lower section and see if that sounds good, and this might be good enough to use for our project for sound design purposes. Okay, I can live with that. I'll do a spot check in the mid-range. And yeah, I think I can live with this. So now what I want to do is to make sure that every single sample on this track that I have separated out has that set of pitch corrections applied to it. And as you can see, if I zoom out, there's a lot of these. So what I'm going to do, this track, not my MIDI track, but we'll do bounce track in place, and it should go. Okay, And now you'll notice I don't have any audio effects on the track, and it's going through and it's re-rendering all of my files. Now, if I take a look at one of my files, let's take a look at my highest D. You'll note that down here, it says Mando_PP_D6, and it now has bounce written in there in the parentheses. So let's take a look at that with a tuner. So I'm going to grab a tuner and drop it onto the track and see if these have in fact been pitch shifted and are now in tune with the tuner. And in fact, they have been. So at this point, all of these files have been bounced. They are now in my Ableton project folder under samples, and then there will be processed, and then there's going to be a bounced folder in there that's going to have all of those files in there. So at this point, it's a good idea to do a save, and in fact, I would even recommend that you do a collect all and save and make sure that the top 3 options are selected. All right, so now we are ready to build our sampler. We have all of the files. All we need is to go to our instruments, and we need to find our sampler and drag that onto a MIDI track. Then we're going to click on the Zone tab to expand the zone. From here, what we're going to do is we're going to close the browser. I'm going to select all of my samples in the quiet range. I'm going to grab all of those. We're going to take them to our sampler device and drop them into the zone. Now, at this point, there is a small problem you can see, and that is that they have changed the name of the files. They did not render those. So that's a slight issue. What we're going to do is we're going to select all of the files here, and there is a way to force them to be renamed. And what we're going to do is we're going to do consolidate clips. Or specifically, we're going to do crop clips, not consolidate. Consolidate would merge them. But crop clips, and it's rewriting every single clip. You can see it running down here in the bottom left, and I have the spinning apple beach ball. Okay, let's try this one more time. Select the first one, hold Shift, and select the last one. Now we're going to bring up our sampler and drop it in the zone, and now they have the actual names. And more importantly, they are all in perfect order. So that's really important, that the order has been preserved. Okay, so now, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to grab the samples. I'm going to select all, and then I'm going to grab the low and high sliders, and I'm going to adjust them for everything. So my lowest possible note is G2. So I'm going to grab that, I'm going to move it up to G2, and then my highest possible note is D6, so I'm going to move that to D6. And that will just allow me to see that everything has been loaded as I go and I add the next set of samples, which are going to be for a higher velocity layer. So we're going to grab that, and we're going to insert it. Come on. And it's not going to show that for some reason. There we are. So I'm going to drag these all the way down to the very, very bottom of the list and add those. Okay, once you have all of your samples in the sampler, you need to adjust the root key and the low and high key range. So I've already gone through and done that with 2 of my velocity layers, and that's how I've arranged everything. So I'm starting with pianissimo, G2, all the way up through D6. Then I go to mezzo, G2 through D6, and then I've got fortissimo, G2 through D6. So I'm just going to show you how to do this on the loudest one, and I'm going to fast forward again so you don't have to watch me doing this for everything. So what I want to do is I want to select the entire set of samples and their dynamic layer. So I'm going to select the first one, the G2 fortissimo, hold down Shift and select the fortissimo. So by default, when you load a sample into the sampler in Ableton, it assumes that the root key is C3, which is middle C. Now, this is not what I want. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change the root key for everything. I'm going to tell it that the root key is G2 for all of these selected samples. And I can do that by holding down Option and clicking on G2 over here, and it adjusts the root key for everything. I'm also going to crop it so that all of these samples low value is G2 and that all of their high value is also G2. All right, now with all of these still selected, I'm going to hold down Command and click on the first one, the G2. I have set that. That is its own root key and its own low and high, so that's great. Now I'm going to grab the other samples. I'm going to move them up. And as it does that, it moves all of them up by 1 step, and you can see that it's adjusting their low, their high, and their root key to match that next key. So here, everything is now up to my first C, C3. So from G2 to C3, everything has its own low, high, and root value. And again, I'm just holding down Command to deselect a file after I've edited it, and then I'm just moving on to the next one. So do that and use that to adjust everything as quickly as possible so that all of your notes are going up chromatically. Now, one thing that students have asked in the past is, should I just put all of the G's in one area, then all of the G flats, then all of the A's, whatever? Please don't do that. Do this by dynamic layers and do it chromatically. This is going to make your life very, very easy in a second after I fast forward and we get to the point of doing dynamic edits. So I'm going to continue doing this, and I will fast forward and see you in a second when we're ready to do the dynamic edits. Okay, well, again, through the magic of cuts and fast forwards, I have now got all of my samples set so that they all have the correct root key and they all have the correct low and high key, and I'm going up from G2 to D6 chromatically for every single sample. At this point, I am going to save. Now, however, there is a problem, which is that if I enable MIDI record on this track and I play a note, I'm not getting one sample triggering, I'm getting 3. I'm getting every instance of middle C. So we need to fix that, and we do that by setting different dynamic or velocity layers. So in the sampler, I'm going to make sure that the zone is up. I'm going to click on velocity. And now we can see that we have a range of velocities for every single sample, and that they're all set to trigger from 1 or any non-zero value all the way up through 127. So we have 127 different values, and we need to divide this up into 3 separate areas. So 127 divided by 3 is roughly every 42. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of my pianissimo files, and I want these to start at dynamic level 1 and then go to 42. So I'm just going to grab the edge and take it down until it's at 42. Now I'm going to select all of my mezzos, and I'm going to do the same thing, except these are going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to grab these, I'm going to have them start at 43 so that there's no overlap with the previous set. I can verify that just by looking up here, and I can also see that, in fact, when I hold down the mouse, that the lowest one, the lowest dynamic velocity is set to 43. So again, I'm going to select all of these by holding down the Shift key, making sure that they're the only ones selected. So now 42 plus 42 is going to give me 84. So I'm going to take that down for the high velocity to 84. Now I just need to set this for my fortissimos. So I'm going to select all of those. And at this point, all I have to do is move the low slider up to 85, and then that's going to play all the way for velocities of 85 through 127. There we go. So at this point, this should be correct. If I hit middle C as light as humanly possible, I get that velocity, and it plays the pianissimo file. If I hit it kind of medium, all the way to hard, I can adjust the velocity, and I get different versions of the note coming through based on those different velocities. So at this point, I can go through and I can make some edits to my sampler. I can make sure that everything plays, but I really do want to save my project at this point to make sure that nothing is going to get lost. So I'm also going to do a collect all and save, the always important part. Then, with the sampler, I am going to want to make sure that I can access this again. So I'm going to hit the save icon on the sampler device itself. And it's going to say, what is the name of your sampler? What do you want to call it? So I'm going to use last name, underscore, and then the instrument. Then I'm going to hit enter. And it's going to copy all of that media into a .adv file. And if I want to, I can show in Finder, and it will show where that's at. Now, if I wanted to share that, there's a slight problem, because that does not include the actual audio files for our sampler. So in order to share everything, what I want to do is I want to go to View and File Manager. I then want to go to Manage Project, and I want to make sure that there are no missing files in here. Then I want to go down here to Packing and expand that and hit Create Pack. And then I'm going to go to my desktop on my Mac, so that's Command-Shift-D. I'm going to give it a name, and it should be the name of your instrument. And then I'm going to hit Save. And this is going to take everything in my folder, all of the audio files, all of the consolidated, all of the cropped, everything, and it's going to create an ALP file. That ALP file can then be shared with other users and you can expand it to access their sample instruments and save that to your computer so that it's in your Ableton's user library folder on your specific computer, which means that you can then use that sample. So that's the sampling tutorial. I realize this is a really, really big one. So watch this as many times as you need in order to make sure that everything is understood and that you have your sampler created correctly.